Hello everyone, welcome to this talk. I'm Rohan Taneja. I work as a software engineer at Delivery Hero. And we are here to present how we built the cross-platform DroidCon app in Flutter and what was our experience with it, what would we learn from it. So, first question, why did we do it? We are Delivery Hero. We are a product-based company. We do not use Flutter in production, but we are really excited about it. We have been reading about it for quite some time now. We have been seeing different blogs and videos that the community has been publishing. And we want to integrate Flutter into our existing app if the time comes when it's right. But before we do that, we actually wanted to see how a standalone Flutter app actually works. What would be the pitfalls that we go through? What would be the shortcomings? Where would it be really good that we would have to approach it really soon? And that's why we wanted to do it in a time-constrained environment, because that's where the biggest power of cross-platform technologies lie. And that would also, and if we decided to do it for DroidCon, because this would allow us for immediate feedback. We would build the app, and as soon as the conference dates hit, we would get feedback. So we decided to do an Android version, an iOS version, and a web version, all using Flutter. There's no other technology involved. If you haven't used these apps yet, the Android one is live on the Play Store. Just search for DroidCon Berlin 2019 and look for the orange icon or the one from Delivery Hero. The iOS one is available as well, and the web is available on the link above. All three links you can find on the link above as well. So you can download and test now if you'd like to. So how were we set up? What did the team look like? Let's see what that was. We had one Android engineer, one iOS engineer, and one front-end engineer. I'm just kidding. That would have been really ideal. We would have done this in 10 days. What we had was just one Android engineer. Unfortunately, me. So we did this in 15 weekdays, assuming it to be 2 hours per day in between work hours or sometimes after that. But we had 2 full weekends. So I spent 10 hours on a Saturday and a Sunday and 20 hours for every weekend. So approximately it came out to 70, 72 hours. But that's for 3 platforms. That's not for one. In 72 hours, we were able to build the Android app, the iOS app, and web, and publish all 3 within time right before the conference. So approximately we had 24 hours per platform. How did the development process look like? Where did we find our problems? So initially, when we started off, we looked for inspiration. What does an actual conference app look like? And what better way to start than look at the Google I/O app? So we looked at the app, and we really liked how they approached it. They had a list of sessions, and this app looks pretty much the same every year. Then you could see the session details. At some point, you had AR stuff, which we would definitely not pick. And the tabs were not sliding for some reason. So we thought this was really good, but we wanted to make some more changes. Next, we look at the requirements. The requirements were that we would build our clients in Flutter. That was sorted out. We had data sources, a data source in the form of the APIs provided by DroidCon. They were kind enough to provide it to us on the same day that we requested for. And we also wanted to add the functionality to add a session to your favorites so that you don't need to look through the list on the day of the conference. Just look at your favorites. We decided to handle favorites using Firebase because we ultimately did want to use Firebase because that offered analytics, crash reporting, remote config, and some other stuff. We wanted to see how that integrates into Flutter. And we were not sure about the designs, but we thought we will find our way through that as we build, because Flutter is really good with designs. You can change really quickly. So within a day or two, I was able to prepare this on both Android and iOS. And we didn't have a sessions list yet, but we had a speakers list directly coming from the APIs. So how did we consume the REST APIs? With Flutter, it's not as complicated as it is with native Android right now. Just have one dependency, that's the HTTP package available on pub.dev. That's where all the Flutter dependencies are. And you don't need any enqueue or on failure methods. You just need one await call. It's tagged with await because Flutter has great support for futures. You can put an async call into action, and the next line won't execute until that completes. So we just need to perform http.get, provide the URL, and it would fetch the response for us. The next step was parsing. Parsing is even simpler, just one line. You provide the JSON to your JSON decoder, and it does the stuff for you. Then you can use operators like map on it to convert the JSON response into your session response or a speaker class. So, but we did run into some parsing errors. If you are a Flutter developer, if you have tried any apps in Flutter that use REST APIs, you must have seen this error. If you have not seen this, you're really, really good. So at some point, we were parsing something, we were expecting something to be a list, but it was actually a string, or the other way around. So we did manage to fix it, but the best part about Flutter was lists and grids. With Android, we have struggled with list views for a long time. Then came along Recycle View, and then came along the Recycle View adapter. There was a funny quiz in one of the booths a couple of days ago where you had to code a Recycle View adapter without Googling, and you would win a bag. That's what the state of Android Recycle View adapters is in today's world. So with Flutter, that was really easy. You just needed list views and grid views, and it gave you the same performance as a Recycle View did, because it would only display the items that are currently on the screen. The others would not be in memory. So everything went so well so far, but we implemented the sessions list, and we realized that the API response that we are getting does not exactly match what we want to display on our screens. If we get everything once, so the API had all the sessions and speakers in just one API. If we were hitting that API and getting everything, even though we only wanted to display the sessions list, that would have given us some performance issues. So we decided to replace our data source with Firebase. So we threw the REST APIs out. We thought we'll manage with Firebase somehow. So I took the help of some backend engineers. They helped me upload the JSON files in bulk to Firestore as a collection. So we would completely replace the REST APIs with Firestore. So the rest remained the same. We would still use analytics and crash reporting using Firebase. The designs were still not yet in. And the next step was authentication. Now, I see a few raised eyebrows in the room. I've seen feedback for the last 2 days. And people questioned that why did we force the user to use Twitter authentication before they could actually see something in the app? So just to calm everyone down, we did have continue as a guest until 1 or 2 weeks ago. But I had the privilege of having a talk on the third day is that you can use slides from the other 2 days. So I attended Andrea's talk yesterday, and she said, what would you rather ship to the customer, 1 complete feature or 3 semi-complete features? So I did know just allowing the user to see the sessions and the speaker is really, really important. If I were using an app that forced me to log in, I would abuse the developer as well, but that is what I ended up doing. I wanted to put in local storage guest user later on, but first focus on doing one functionality completely. But Twitter login did not work. I thought I was using Flutter. I'm doing cross-platform stuff. I would never have to worry about Android and iOS. But it's not so nice as it looks from the outside. I did have to jump into native code at some point. I jumped into iOS. The Twitter authentication with Firebase worked perfectly with Android. With iOS, it gave me some issues. And with iOS, I had no experience. I looked up the GitHub issues. I looked up help on Stack Overflow. A lot of people had solved these issues, but maybe that was from a couple of months ago. I was still struggling with them. So I decided to drop it for now and focus on some other things. And luckily, the designer decided to help us. Some designer on our team just said that I'll do something on the weekend or one night. I'll give you some prototypes, not the actual Zeppelin things, and you can go on with that. So you see the header in the screen. That's an orange header with different gradients and circular shapes. He thought that I'm an Android developer, so he decided to give me the headers as image assets. But no, this is not Android. This is Flutter. We did not use the image assets. I spent a day on this, and I used a widget that's called a custom painter. It makes it really easy to paint any shape on the screen. I did this using arcs and circles, and within a day, I had that ready. What that meant that I could reuse this whenever I want. If the designer decided to switch this to purple, I could do it in half a day, or red, or blue, or green, or whatever you wanted. We ultimately decided for orange because that's what the DroidCon theme looks like. If the next year, if they decide to go with purple, we don't have to import any other image assets, just change the color. And pretty soon, we had an app that looked pretty OK. So we had a sessions list, a speakers list. You could add favorite sessions to your favorite list. And we had snack bars popping up when you did that. The icons were not still the final version, but we were at a pretty decent place. The one major confidence that Flutter gives you is that if your app runs on one platform in a certain way, it is certain that it would run on iOS or other devices in the exact same way. With Android, we struggle that Samsung overrides the fonts, Oxygen OS does something else. With Flutter, you don't really have to worry about anything of that sort. If an app looks like this on Android, it will look like the same on iOS. It will look like the same on an older Android device like a Nexus S or something. So you don't have to worry about that. How did we handle crash reporting? So Firebase does have good support for crash reporting, but unfortunately, it did not work for me. I tried working it up with Android. Later, I would worry about iOS. But with Android, there were some dependency conflicts, so it did not really work. But luckily, Flutter has support for Sentry. It worked really well. The documentation on this is really, really good, so you may want to try that out. We ultimately settled for that, and these are all the errors we caught during the 2 or 3 days that the app has been live for. And none of these are probably crashes. I added some custom logging just for errors, just so that I could see what's wrong with the UI, but none of these made the app crash. There's 1 or 2 bugs, which I'll come to later. How else did Firebase help us? Firebase Analytics was really good. It worked with the first go. I could log as many custom events as I wanted, and they started showing up in half a day or the day after. Firebase also had great support for remote config. Initially, on the sidebar of the app, you wouldn't have seen try the web version, but as soon as we launched web, I just enabled the flag on remote config, and you started to access, and you started to see the section where you could navigate to the web version from within the app. And there were some pitfalls. This is where I spent most of my time, probably 3 or 4 days struggling with these. Persisting top tab bars with not bottom tab bars with streams was an issue. Sometimes when I would switch the bottom tab bar from favorites to sessions, I would lose my position in the sessions list. Otherwise, if I was only in the sessions tab and I had the 3 top tabs, if I switched the tabs between them, I would look similar to an interface. And that allows you to keep the state of your tabs alive. So no matter which tab you switch to, the list position would always be held. It took some digging to find this, but ultimately it was solved. The next was streams. I tried putting streams are something similar to observables. So I tried putting them in the build method. And every time my build method would be called, the widget would rebuild, the streams would be initialized again. So that was a really bad way to approach things. And ultimately, I realized that I should put them in the init state method. That's called only once for the first time when the widget is created. And the third thing was the bottom nav bar. I finally solved it using something called an index stack that only displays what's on top of the stack at the moment and keeps the others still in memory somehow. And the other way to do this is using page storage keys. Keys are an essential part of every Flutter app. You can have same widgets at 5 places in your apps, and keys is what will help you differentiate them from one another. How did we approach Flutter Web? So when you create a Flutter Web project, it's somewhat like this. So the structure in between is from our project, but the layout on Android and iOS is the default one. So you get the same app, Hello World, for Flutter that you would have on Flutter Web as well. And it's pretty easy to set up if you read the instructions carefully, but there are some changes when you're using Firebase and other stuff. So the major change was you cannot use Cloud Firestore on Flutter Web because Cloud Firestore uses the native Android and iOS plugins through method channels. So we had to settle for something else that's also a package provided from the Google team, and that's a Firebase package that completely exists in Dart. There's no Android and iOS logic involved. Then the other was some syntax changes. So when you're using Firestore on mobile, you have to get an instance and then call snapshots. On web, there was a minor syntax change that it's called onSnapshot, and you don't get a syntax. The Firestore constructor gives you the syntax itself as a singleton. And then for parsing your responses, the speaker snapshot full name would be converted to speaker snapshot.data, full name, a minor change. The other change included that documents was refactored to docs. And if I wanted to launch external URLs, which you would do using intents in your Android app, On the mobile side, you have a package that's called a URL launcher, and it gives you the launch method. You just provide it the URL, and it does what exactly an intent would do. On the web, that does not exist because, again, the URL launcher uses Android and iOS. The web version is using HTML. So this may seem confusing that why are we including HTML in Flutter? But the documentation says that we do have some HTML-related packages with Flutter Web right now, but they are only there until Flutter Web is in technical preview. They would be removed completely and replaced by something better once Flutter Web goes stable as well. When we launched the Flutter Web app, I got this. So these were the issues that you got. There were some passing issues. You didn't have an instance of query snapshot. It says that there's no method found for documents, and that's when I replaced documents with docs, and it started to work perfectly. So on iOS, it looks something like this. I do have an Android as well. Yeah, so iOS on the left, Android on the right. This is Safari, this is Chrome. It worked perfectly, but not so perfectly. There were some issues. So on the mobile app, if you see the speakers picture, if there are multiple speakers for a session, you would see a +2 next to the speaker's image. On web, it looked a little deformed. And on the speaker details page, the banner for the +2 icon would clip out completely. I tried solving this, but I wasn't able to do so in the end, so I just removed them from the web version. Other than that, a major shock for me was that my Firebase API calls started to hit extreme margins. I didn't expect that. I was the only user who was testing this, and I had 75,000 API calls in an hour or so. Even though I was testing rigorously, this should not have happened. That's when I realized that persistence for Firebase is enabled by default on mobile, but it's not enabled by default on web. I tried searching something. I couldn't set it up, so I left it there for now and struggled to see how I would actually end up paying for this. But luckily, Delivery Hero was kind enough. They managed to take control of this, and we opted for the pay-as-you-go model. Yeah, so this is what happened when we hit the daily limits. I was at 193K at some point because persistence wasn't enabled by the default. But in the end, Flutter Web also turned out to be really nice. It looked really good, exactly what the app would look like, but it wasn't responsive. Since the apps only cater to smaller screens, if you would stretch it out, it would start to look bad. But on the smaller screens on iOS, it looked really good. On Android, it looked exactly the same as it would look on iOS because this is Flutter. And in the end, I also spent some time to manage the responsiveness. I just used aspect ratio and the number of items I would fit in according to the width of the screen, and it worked out perfectly. So what are the bugs that we have on our apps right now? This is not a bug in the slides. This is a bug in the app. When you see the app, sometimes when you open the app, you would just see a white screen. At that point, you would have to close the app and launch it again for it to function well. I'm still not sure why this occurs. I Googled it out, and some other people face this too, only with the release version. So there's something that needs investigating from us and from the Flutter team as well. The other thing was that when you open the speakers detail page and you come back out suddenly, there's an exception that you are trying to rebuild the UI, but the UI is not there. The screen is not there. It has lost focus. Another advantage of this was that when I was building for Flutter Web, I realized that on mobile, we are seeing the logcat, the run tab, and it's not clear immediately that there is an error. You have to scroll down, you have to open and close windows. On web, it is immediately clear using the inspect element option. That's when I thought that if you are building a Flutter app, try building it for web first. You'll immediately see more issues than you would see on mobile, and it would help a lot with debugging. So that's what the web version looked like. I figured out that this is something that was wrong on my end, so should be fixed with the next update probably. Then the other issue was that I mentioned keys earlier. When you're not using keys and you're rebuilding and you're reusing your icons or navigation drawer somewhere, just like you can see in this GIF, the Sessions tab has a navigation drawer. The Favorites tab also has a navigation drawer. They're supposed to be the same. But if you open the navigation drawer on the session screen, you go to the Favorites screen and open the navigation drawer, they would both be opened up on different screens separately. If you close it on one screen, it would not close on the other screen. So since I was using keys, these were being handled separately, but the solution for this was to have a key for a navigation drawer as well and close it as soon as you switch tabs. Performance. So there's a myth around the communities that Flutter is not good with performance, but that's completely not true. Flutter provides you inbuilt support for a profiler, which is similar to the monitor that we have on Android now. When you run the profiler, which is done using Flutter run profile, you run it on an actual device. You cannot do it on a simulator or an emulator. Right on top of the screen, you see two graphs. These are for memories, and other one is for the runtime issues. If you see any spikes, then there's something terribly wrong that you're doing. I saw immediate spikes when I was using streams in the build method of my widgets. As soon as I moved them to init state, everything was fine. The other way to handle performance issues or other bugs is use the Flutter inspector. So these are inbuilt in your IDEs like Android Studio, IntelliJ, VS Code. Flutter is supported first class on those IDEs. A good feature with these is that if you have the device running in your hand and you use this icon from the Flutter inspector, as soon as you click on a widget on the screen, it would jump you to the code lines which that widget represents. So you don't need to think where was this thing coded. You navigate to that and fix it. You just click on that screen, click on that widget, and directly you jump to the code that is responsible for that widget. And the other myth is about performance. So if you ever see this banner on a demo GIF or a demo video or an actual Flutter app, please know that this is a debug version. This was not meant to be shown for demos or release. The debug version in a Flutter app uses the Dart VM so that it can make use of hot reload. Hot reload allows you to immediately see your code changes in the emulator or the device that you're using to test it. So if you see the debug banner, that's not the final version of the app. You run the final version using Flutter run release. That's when you don't see the debug banner and you would not see any performance issues. If you try the DroidCon app in Flutter right now, and if you didn't know if it was in Flutter, I bet you cannot tell that it was not a native app. So how did we release for apps? The Android release was pretty straightforward. A great thing about Flutter is that it also has support for app bundles, so you don't need to worry about app sizes spiking up or something like that. You can just run Flutter build app bundle, and you get them prepared as a AAB file. But Google Play now warns you that if you do not have 64-bit supported code, 64-bit supported APKs, then it throws off a warning that after the 1st of August, you cannot publish or update apps that do not support 64-bit. That's what Flutter had as an issue at the time I was publishing, which was 3 days ago. And luckily, just yesterday, I saw this tweet from Tim Sneath, who is the head of the Flutter team. This issue has now been solved on Flutter. If you build using app bundles, you would no longer see this warning on the Play Store. And it's on the beta branch right now for the Flutter SDK. It would be merged with the stable branch on the 8th of July. The iOS release. I had no experience with the iOS. And I came to know that even if you have experience with iOS releases, you still struggle. So only God could have helped me, or in this case, a helping colleague who was an iOS engineer. So I had no clue about Fastlane, provisioning profiles, how certificates worked in iOS, but I had some help, and within half a day, we were able to release this on Hockey as an enterprise build. User statistics, how many users did we end up getting? So I just got this screenshot an hour ago. We had 449 users. If we just had one more, I didn't have to round this off. And out of those, since this is an Android conference, you would expect most of them to be Android developers. But it's good to know that still some iOS users in the world are curious about how Flutter works, and they downloaded this. Most of the users were from Germany, and the rest were from India. That's where my friends are. So they were curious to find bugs in my app. So they installed it a lot of times. How did we release for web? I have to truly commend the support from CodeMagic. This is a CI/CD tool from a company called Nevercode, who also have a booth set up outside. They have great support for Flutter releases. They were one of the first CI/CD tools that existed for Flutter. And for Flutter Web, what they allow you is that when your build passes, you can publish it on a static web page provided by them with a domain name called codemagic.app. If you're building for iOS or Android, you can even release your apps to the Play Store using CodeMagic. You don't have to do it manually. So for me, this would have helped if we were publishing iOS to the App Store. So like I said, they give you a static domain for free. There's no limitations on this one. You just choose a subdomain and you can get your website there. So the Flutter web DroidCon app is available on dcberlin19.codemagic.app. So thank you, CodeMagic, for the great support. They were even available on weekends to solve a few issues of mine. So they're really good. So retrospection, what would we have done differently? First things first, no forced sign-in for the users. I would have probably opted to go for local storage since that suits this use case better. But since we wanted to see how Firebase integrates with everything else, we decided to go for Firebase. And we didn't have enough time for local storage, so ultimately it decided to be a forced login. Conclusion, how does Flutter work? Who does it suit? A rewrite in Flutter, if you're a product company, definitely no. There's nothing that's worth a rewrite just because it's a hype around the community. It's a great tool even, but nothing's worth a rewrite. If we were doing an app from scratch today, we would probably go with Flutter if we didn't have the engineers, if we didn't have enough engineers. If you're already a team of 10 iOS engineers, 10 Android engineers, then go the native way. There's no problem with that. If you're building something like a conference app that you know would only be used on 3 days for a year, there's no point doing it natively. Just use Flutter. That's probably the ideal use case for Flutter, but that does not mean that that's the only use case. Alibaba, Tencent, Google, all these companies have been using Flutter in their production apps, even though they are product companies, and it has been going well for them so far. So ultimately, Flutter does allow you to ship clean apps, beautiful apps, or should I say swift apps. So they do some stuff really well, even though there are some competitors coming in the market. All of those iOS developers who have been really excited with Swift UI, even I was, it's a really good thing that everyone's moving in the declarative code direction. Swift UI is supported on iOS 13 and above. Flutter is supported on iOS 8 and above. So when you go back to your offices, please tell your iOS engineers about this. Towards the end, I would like to quote something from Lionel Messi. He said that it took him 17-something years to become an overnight success. How does this relate to Flutter? We'll get to that in a second. Android came out in 2008. Yeah, that's when the first API 1.0 was launched. So Android came out 11 years ago. React Native came out in March 2015. So that was less than 5 years ago. 5 years is a huge time. For those of you who do not really believe this, a lot can happen in 5 years. As humans, we tend to forget where we have come from and where we are right now. So just to do a recap, let's see what has happened in the last 5 years. Apple Watch didn't exist 5 years ago. Germany was still the FIFA World Cup champions. There was no Ice Dragon, just 3 dragons. You remember this, I'm sure. It's blue and gold, it's not white, please, guys. And 5 years ago, Twitter did not have the edit tweet option. But wait, Twitter still does not have the edit tweet option. Seriously, Twitter, you need to do something about this. So with Flutter, it's at this point of time, it's good enough that you compare it to something that was launched 5 years ago. We tend to forget that if React Native was being talked about in 2015, it was being compared to native Android and iOS. It wasn't good at that point. But look where React Native is in today's date, 5 years on. So when we compare Flutter to native or React Native, it's an important point to know that Flutter is not even 1 year old right now if you consider the 1.0 release in December last year. So just give it time. The community is growing. I've not seen any community be so enthusiastic about this thing. Just give it time. It will be there soon. And that brings me to another thing. How many of you over here have watched The Prestige? Can I have a show of hands, please? The Prestige, the movie with Christian Bale. Okay, half of you. So The Prestige is one of my favorite movies. And one of my favorite scenes from the movie is where Christian Bale shows this magic trick with a coin to a kid, and the kid gets really excited about it. Then Christian Bale tells him a really important lesson. The secret impresses no one. The trick that you use it for is everything. In the mobile world today, we have the privilege of getting access to so many of these technologies. If the tech that we choose solves a real-world problem and brings money to the business, or it does both at the same time, then we are good to go with anything. A healthy discussion is always nice if you're measuring the pros and cons of all the technologies and choosing the right way. But at some point, we do tend to get attached to our technologies a lot, to our tools a lot. So if we stop doing that and instead focus on pros and cons, then we'll go a really long way. So how does the Prestige code relate to us? The technology impresses no one. The value that you provide to the customer is everything. And I did this 10 minutes ago. Okay, since The Prestige is my favorite movie, every great app consists of 3 parts or acts. The first part is called the idea. A friend comes to you and shows you something ordinary, a picture, a text message, or a resume. He shows you this object, and he asks you to inspect it, see that if it's unaltered, real, or normal. And you, the developer, as part of the second part of the act that's called the development, you take this something ordinary and convert it into something extraordinary. Now you're testing for bugs, but you won't find them because you haven't written any tests. You're not really looking. You want to be fooled. You won't even close the Jira ticket yet because just making something work is not enough. You still have to pass code review. So that's why every great app has a third part or a third act, the hardest one, and that's the act that we call the release. So if you are choosing any technology, it solves the problem of your business. Choose anything, solve problems, and you're good to go. Flutter is not the best thing for everything, but it's really good. That's what our journey was with Flutter. That's what we learned during this process, and these were the takeaways from this amazing experience. If you'd like to know what other projects we work on, and if you'd like to create amazing delivery and takeaway experiences, come talk to us at the booth outside. We are here for the rest of the day. Thank you.